Hi everybody, welcome to Boundaries Week 3. In this video we're going to go over chapters 7 through 10. And then next week we're splitting up section 2, so we're doing 7 through 10 this week. We're going to do 11 through 13 next week. And then the week after that we're going to do 14, 15, and 16, and then we'll be done. So I'm going to pray for us and then we'll get started. Father, I want to thank you for each of the women who's going through this study with us. We are so honored that you are using us as your hands and feet to do this. I want to ask you to be with all of our hearts as we're going through this material. There's so much great material, and if we really put it into practice, it can change the unhealthy boundaries and unhealthy way that we're relating to our family members and our spouses and our kids, and it's really going to change the way that our families look for generations. So we want to thank you for giving us this material and giving us the heart to do this. I want to ask you to please just pour your Holy Spirit over everything that we do. Be with everything that comes out of my mouth. Make it edifying to you, because everything that we do, we want to give you glory and honor. We ask this in your name. Amen. Chapter 7, Boundaries with Family. This is probably one of the most difficult sections for us to set boundaries in, so I'm just going to get right into it. Signs of a lack of boundaries. There's a big long list here, so I'm just going to hit them one by one. The first one is catching the virus, and what that means is that our families of origin have unhealthy ways of relating to each other, and that we allow a trickle-down effect so that those end up showing up in our new families that we create with our spouses and our kids. The book, the way that it was described, reminded me of Numbers 14:18. This is from the NIV. The Lord is slow to anger, abounding in love, and forgiving sin and rebellion, yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children for the sins of the parents to the third and fourth generation. These unhealthy family dynamics just get passed down and passed down and passed down, and that's why it's so important that we recognize these dynamics and do our absolute best to fix them before they're passed down to our kids. The next one on the list is second fiddle. This is when someone from our family of origin takes priority over our own family, and that's not how God designed it to be. Genesis 2:24 says we are to leave our parents and cleave to our spouses. Josh is really good at calling me out on this one, but it's still one that I'm working on. And unfortunately, it took a 5-day disaster with our oldest son to get there. A few years ago at Christmas, I let my mom's want take precedent over our son's need. She wanted us to come over for the day, and even though I knew that we were going to my sister's the next day and he was going to miss his nap 2 days in a row if I did that, I still let her want take precedent over his need for a good long afternoon nap. And what ended up happening was after that, it took 5 days for his sleep cycle to get back on track, which may not sound like a big deal to most of you, but 5 days with a cranky, angry 18-month-old when I was, 6 months pregnant at the time, it's not fun. So that is definitely a hard-learned lesson for us, that our extended family's wants will not supersede our nuclear family's needs. It's just not something we're willing to do anymore. The next one, may I have my allowance, please? And I actually want to read a paragraph from the bottom of page 132. An adult who does not stand on his own financially is still a child. To be an adult, you must live within your means and pay for your own failures. That is one that I am guilty of. When Josh and I were engaged, my parents actually were extremely generous and helped me get out from underneath a large financial burden that I had gotten myself into. Unfortunately, at that time, I didn't think forward to, hey, this is going to cause a huge issue with my husband and I as we're trying to set up house and set up our finances, and I'm still beholden to my parents. So while they were being extremely generous, I should have been an adult in that situation and said, nope, I'm going to figure this out on my own. So learn from my mistake and don't get yourself there. Next one, Mom, where are my socks? I dated this guy. I don't really have anything to say. Hopefully some of you do in the comments, though. If you have anything to add to our conversation over anything that we go over today, please do so in the comments. 3's a crowd. This is my family when we are arguing, and it drives me crazy. I am always person C. It just drives me nuts. If you are angry with someone else in your family, just say it. Don't be passive aggressive. Don't be not inviting them to things. Whatever. Just talk it out and get it over with. Everyone will be much happier. Who's the child here anyhow? But I'm your brother. For the sake of time, I'm going to tie these together because the problem is the same. The person with the boundary issue is the person who is the savior for the parents or the sibling. Doesn't matter. Either way, you are not responsible for being their savior. That's where the law number 6 comes in, the law of evaluation. Sometimes you have to hurt them to help them, and if you find yourself in that situation where you are constantly bailing out your parents or you're constantly bailing out a sibling, it's time to take a good hard look at the situation and evaluate, if I say no now, is it going to be better for them in the long run? If it is, then you need to set the boundary. As hard as it is, you need to set the boundary. So the next section in the book is, but why do we do that? Cloud and Townsend list 2 reasons for boundary problems with our families of origin. Either 1, they're actually boundary issues from when we were children that we carried over as an adult because we never learned to set a boundary, or it wasn't something that was discussed, or we're afraid to set a boundary. So now all of those issues from when we were kids have now carried over into our adult dynamic. Or 2, we never transitioned into adulthood and were spiritually adopted into God's family. So let's read a couple of sections on page 138 about this. And the first section is the first full paragraph at the top of the page. Numerous New Testament passages teach that we need to forsake our allegiance to our original family and become adopted by God. Matthew 23:9. God commands us to look to Him as our Father and to have no parental intermediaries. Adults who are still holding an allegiance to earthly parents have not realized their new adoptive status. And then if we skip down 4 paragraphs there towards the bottom, this in no way means that we are to cut ties with others. We are to have friends outside of God's family and strong ties with our family of origin. However, we need to ask 2 questions. Do these ties keep us from doing the right thing in any situation? And have we really become an adult in relation to our family of origin? If not, we need to learn how to set those boundaries. So how do we do that? Well, we have a little 9-step step-by-step here for how to do that. So number 1, identify the symptom. Where have you lost control? Remember, out of control is the hallmark of boundary problems. Something is not being controlled by who needs to be in control of it. Number 2, identify the conflict. Recognize that you have the problem. I have the problem. And find the boundary violation. If I'm allowing my parents to do something, or my sister to do something, or Josh's parents to do something that they're not supposed to, I am the one who allowed that to happen. So I need to be the one responsible for setting the boundary. Number 3, identify the need that drives the conflict. From page 139. I'm actually going to read that whole section. You do not act in inappropriate ways for no reason. You are often trying to meet some underlying need that your family of origin did not meet. Maybe we are still entangled because of a need to be loved, or approved of, or accepted. You must face this deficit and accept that it can only be met in our new family of God, those who are now our true mother, father, brothers, and sisters, those who do God's will and can love you the way He designed. Number 4, take in and receive the good. You have to let God meet your need. This requires humility and trust in your support system. Number 5, practice boundary skills. Just like you practice an instrument, you have to practice setting boundaries with safe people. Say no to the bad. From page 140. The injury you are recovering from is serious, and you can't reestablish a relationship until you have the proper tools. Be careful not to get sucked into a controlling situation again because your wish for reconciliation is so strong. Number 7, forgive the aggressor. Failing to forgive means that you are still hanging on and sinning yourself. Forgiving means letting them go so that you can walk free. Number 8, respond, don't react. From page 141. When you react to something that someone says or does, you may have a problem with boundaries. If someone is able to cause havoc by doing or saying something, she is in control of you at that point, and your boundaries are lost. When you respond, you remain in control with options and choices. The difference between responding and reacting is choice. When you are reacting, they are in control. When you respond, you are in control. Number 9, learn to love in freedom and responsibility, not guilt. Boundaries don't mean you stop showing love. They actually mean the opposite. They mean you've taken care of yourself so that you can love from an honest place, not out of guilt or fear or from being manipulated. It's what we were talking about last week, where you are saying yes because you want to, not because you have to, and in your heart is still saying no. So I hope that very brief fly through chapter 7 was helpful. If you have anything to add, please do so in the comments. We would love to have a conversation with you around this. Thanks. All right, chapter 8, boundaries and your friends. The book describes 4 basic boundary conflicts with friends. So we're just gonna go through them 1, 2, 3, 4 real quick. The compliant and the compliant. I'm pretty sure that after reading through the whole rafting incident at the beginning there, it was pretty predictable how it was going to end, and I'm fairly certain that Grey's Anatomy had a storyline that included this at some point. 2 yes people ending up doing what neither really wanted to do. In that situation, a little honesty could have saved both of them a very uncomfortable situation. Compliant and aggressive controller. In this situation, the compliant needs to take action and let the controller take responsibility for themselves. Compliant manipulative controller. Once again, compliant needs to take action. I'm a compliant. We always need to take action. We always need to learn to just say no, set that boundary. The same thing with the compliant non-responsives. We can't just let them coast through our relationship and get feeling like we're frustrated because we're the only ones putting anything into it. If that's the case, then not only do we need to say no, but we need to communicate that no. I think that was the law of expression, maybe law 8 or law 9 back a few chapters ago. So these 4 situations all have one thing in common. The compliant has to start setting and enforcing some boundaries. They need to protect their own emotional yard. That's me. I totally need to do that. Now let's talk about the questions about friendship boundary conflicts. Number 1, aren't friendships easily broken? From page 152. The only thing that will keep them calling, spending time with us, and putting up with us is love. And that's the one thing we can't control. At any moment, any person can walk away from a friendship. However, as we enter more and more into an attachment-based life, we learn to trust love. We learn that the bonds of a true friendship are not easily broken, and we learn that in a good relationship, we can set limits that will strengthen, not injure, the connection. In my own experience, if the friendship is easily broken, it wasn't much of a friendship to begin with. So as much as it may hurt to have that person leave your life, you probably were not on equal footing as far as how important the relationship was. Number 2, how can I set boundaries in romantic friendships? Practice on your other friendships first. Once you're good at that, then you can set limits in the dating world. Since the whole point of dating is to find your life partner, I wholeheartedly agree with the paragraph on page 154. Ignorance of one another's boundaries is one of the most blatant red flags of the poor health of a dating relationship. We'll ask a couple in premarital counseling, where do you disagree? Where do you lock horns? When the answer is, it's just amazing, we're so compatible, we have so few differences. We'll give the couple homework. Find out what you've been lying about to each other. If the relationship has any hope, that assignment will generally help. What if my closest friends are my family? I'm just going to read from the book on this one, page 154. God intended the family to be an incubator in which we grow the maturity tools and abilities we need. Once the incubator has done its job, then it's supposed to encourage the young adult to leave the nest and connect with the outside world. Genesis 2:24. To establish a spiritual and emotional family system on one's own. Okay, that didn't make any sense. Once the incubator has done its job, then it's supposed to encourage the young adult to leave the nest and connect to the outside world, Genesis 2:24, to establish a spiritual and emotional family system on one's own. The adult is free to do whatever God has designed for him or her to do. Over time, we do accomplish God's purpose of spreading his love to the world to make disciples of all nations, Matthew 28:19 and 20. Staying emotionally locked into the family of origin frustrates this purpose. It's hard to see how we'll change the world when we have to live on the same street. Number 4, how can I set limits with needy friends? This question describes a woman who didn't distinguish between her ministry and her friends. The only word that came to mind for me as I was reading that was burnout. We can only serve others both in relationship and in ministry if our bucket is full. Knowing the difference between people we minister to and who our true close friends are is critical. Otherwise, who comforts the comforter? That is everything for Chapter 8. Okay, Boundaries, Chapter 9. Boundaries and your spouse. This one is hard. Just because of the nature of marriage relationships, it's hard. The way that I understand it is boundary problems arise mostly when one spouse tries to control an aspect of the other person that they have no business controlling. So let's take a look at some of those areas. Feelings. There's a very common misconception about feelings that I think the key here, is key here. It's addressed on page 159. The problem arises, nope, that's not it. Okay, here we go. We do not communicate our feelings by saying, I feel that you. That's not owning it. We communicate our feelings by saying, I feel sad, I feel hurt, I feel lonely, I feel scared. Such vulnerability is the beginning of intimacy and caring. Second, if what you're feeling is anger, that's your responsibility to resolve, not your spouse's. Remember back in chapter 2, feelings fall within your fence. If you are angry, it's up to you to fix it. Desires. Whomever the desire belongs to, it is their responsibility. When we start blaming our spouse for our own disappointments, that is a boundary conflict. We have to own our wants. Limits on what I can give. From page 160 into 161. We are finite creatures and must give as we decide in our heart to give. 2 Corinthians 9:7. Being aware when we are giving past the love point to the resent point. Problems arise when we blame someone else for our own lack of limits. Often spouses will do more than they really want to and then resent the other for not stopping them from overgiving. The key here is recognizing that we have to set our own limits on what we can give. If they are asking for more and we comply, that's on us. That's not on them. Only you have the power to overgive. Now let's talk about the laws of boundaries and how they apply to marriage. The first one, the law of sowing and reaping. This one's pretty self-explanatory and we've already gone over it a few times. Out of control behavior reaps consequences, and we need to be sure that we aren't enabling to that process. Just like with our parents and with our siblings, we cannot be enablers. The law of responsibility. We need to make sure we are being responsible for ourselves and to our spouses. This goes along with the law of sowing and reaping. I'm going to skip ahead now to the law of exposure. From page 165, passive boundaries such as withdrawal, triangulation, pouting, affairs, and passive-aggressive behavior are extremely destructive to a relationship. Passive ways of showing people that they do not have control over you never led to intimacy. They never educate the other on who you really are. They only estrange. Boundaries need to be communicated first verbally and then with action. They need to be clear and unapologetic. That is so important. Marriages need intimacy to thrive. Intimacy requires communication. I don't mean communicating who is picking up the kids for soccer practice and who's going to run to the grocery store, although that's definitely important. I'm talking about when you need a hug, or something is really important to you, or you've been feeling overwhelmed and need a break from dinner. That's the one that I never communicate. I need to work on that. Or maybe you just need some alone time at the coffee shop. No matter what you are communicating, there are a few basic rules to remember. Number 1, respect their physical self. Number 2, choose your words with love. And number 3, speak truthfully. Each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully. Ephesians 4:25. Okay, so the next section in the book is submission. And I know that this is often a kind of touchy subject. Being submissive does not mean being a doormat. Just as God is clear about his boundaries, we should be too. Ephesians 5:21 tells us to submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Both are to submit. Both the husband and the wife need to submit. The question then is, are you submitting out of love? Or because, as the book put it, you're a slave under the law? A wife who's under the law isn't being loved as Christ loved the church. From the book on page 168. Often, in these situations, the husband is trying to get his wife to do something that either is hurtful or takes away her will. Both of these actions are sins against himself. Husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. After all, no one ever hated his own body, but he feeds it and cares for it just as Christ does the church. That's from Ephesians 5:28 and 29. Given this, the idea of slave-like submission is impossible to hold. Christ never takes away our will or asks us to do something hurtful. He never pushes us past our limits. He never uses us as objects. Christ gave himself up for us. He takes care of us he takes care of us as he would his own body. We have never seen a submission problem that did not have a controlling husband at its root. When the wife begins to set clear boundaries, the lack of Christ-likeness in a controlling husband becomes evident, because the wife is no longer enabling his immature behavior. She is confronting the truth and setting biblical limits on hurtful behavior. Often, when the wife sets boundaries, the husband begins to grow. The last piece I want to mention in this chapter is balance. Boundaries keep us accountable to each other. They bring the out-of-control pieces of our marriages back under control. They allow us to truly respect our husbands and our husbands to love us as Christ loves the church. Chapter 10, Boundaries and Our Children. Helping our children learn good boundary setting is one of the most important things that we do as parents. Teaching them well will affect their character, their values, the friends they choose, how they do in school, and eventually their careers and future relationships. Boundaries and responsibility. One of the most important things we do as parents, things we as parents can do for our kids, is teach them about responsibility. They need to know what they are responsible for, how to say no to things that they aren't, and to accept no from others. A proper sense of responsibility is much more easily taught in the first place than it is to fix later. Let's talk about boundary development in children. From pages 178 and 179, on discipline. The positive facets of discipline are proactivity, prevention, and instruction. Positive discipline is sitting someone down to educate and train him in a task. Fathers are to raise children in the training and instruction of the Lord, Ephesians 6:4. The negative facets of discipline are correction, chastisement, and consequences. Negative discipline is letting children suffer the results of their actions to learn a lesson in responsibility. Stern discipline awaits him who leaves the path, Proverbs 15:10. Good child rearing involves both positive training and practice and correctional consequences. For example, if you set a 10 o'clock bedtime for your 14-year-old, it's there so that you'll get enough sleep to be alert in school, you tell her. You've just disciplined positively. Then your teen dawdles until 11:30 p.m. The next day you say, because you did not get to bed on time last night, you may not use the phone today. You've just disciplined negatively. Why are both the carrot and the whip necessary in good boundary development? Because God uses practice, trial and error, to help us grow. We learn maturity by getting information, applying it poorly, making mistakes, learning from our mistakes, and doing better the next time. Now let's talk about why our kids need boundaries. First, they're for self-protection. Just like with adults, boundaries protect their souls, keeping the bad out and the good in. Boundaries also teach responsibility for their own needs. From pages 184 and 185. Our limits create a spiritual and emotional space, a separateness between ourselves and others. This allows our needs to be heard and understood. Without a solid sense of boundaries, it becomes difficult to filter out our needs from those of others. There is too much static in the relationship. How do we help our kids recognize their own needs? We help them to vocalize their feelings. In therapy, we call this emotional coaching. There are some great pointers for how to do this on page 185. With my own kids, Gabriel does this naturally. He has no problem tuning into his own feelings and the feelings of others and vocalizing them. No problem whatsoever. Michael, on the other hand, is the exact opposite. He'll get angry and he doesn't know why, and I can't figure out why, and we both get frustrated. So I see a lot of emotional coaching in our future. Third, boundaries give our kids a sense of control and the freedom to make choices. From page 188, children begin life in a helpless, dependent fashion. Godly parents, however, seek to help children learn to think, make decisions, and master their environment in all aspects of life. This runs the gamut of deciding what to wear in the morning to what courses to take in school. Learning to make age-appropriate decisions helps children have a sense of security and control in their lives. Anxious and well-meaning parents attempt to prevent their children from making painful decisions. They shield them from fouling up and skinning their knees. Their motto is, "Here, let me decide that for you." The result is that kids become atrophied in a very important part of the image that God should be developing in their character: their assertion or change-making abilities. Children need a sense that their lives, their destinies, are largely theirs to determine within the province of God's sovereignty. This helps them weigh choices rather than avoid them. They learn to appreciate the consequences of choices made rather than resenting the choices made for them. Fourth, boundaries teach our kids to delay gratification and be goal-oriented. From page 189, learning how to delay gratification helps children have a goal orientation. They learn to save time and money for things that are important to them, and they value what they have chosen to buy. I think that past generations have called that learning the value of $1. Finally, boundaries teach children to respect others' boundaries. This is important for 2 reasons. 1, accepting limits teaches responsibility for self. It helps them learn to carry their own weight instead of handing someone else their backpack. Remember that talk about who carries the backpack at the beginning of the book. Number 2, respecting others' boundaries teaches them to love. It teaches them empathy. From page 191, as they feel empathy for the needs of others, they mature and deepen in their love for God and others. We love because he first loved us. 1 John 4:19. Because of the vast ages and stages of parenting, I'm going to actually skip the rest of this chapter. If you're like me with a house full of toddlers, the adolescent years aren't even a blip on your radar yet. I can barely think past potty training. And if you have school-age kids, the toddler years don't interest you. Instead, I'm going to encourage you to read the portions that apply to you and refer back when appropriate. And again, if you want to discuss, we would love to discuss in the comments. So please feel free to do so. Thanks.